don't want Bernie Sanders to win the primaries because because I know he won't win against Trump. So, yeah, I like his message, Bernie Sanders, but I know he won't win because of his health policy. It's to the extreme.
So you like him better, but you're going to vote for somebody else?
Yeah, Joe Biden, because I know he can probably win in the swing states, Pennsylvania. Yeah, he can appeal to the union people.
What Bernie can do is he can combat Trump. No matter what Trump says, Bernie has an answer for it, and he's going to say it right away. And I have no doubt of his, he's the best speaker on the stage, so.
With Bernie, it's one and the same. He communicates what he stands for. Because it's not enough to just say you don't like Trump. I mean, of course you don't like Trump, but you got to know what you're for. And I always know what Bernie's for.
Yeah. I'm someone who cares much more about the issues and how they communicate, but I think I'm in the minority. I think everyone in this room is in the minority because we're the kind of people who would show up to this kind of event.
Who's more likely to defeat Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden?
Joe Biden.
How many of you say Bernie Sanders? Raise your hands. And how many of you say Joe Biden? Raise your hands. Why is he a better candidate? Yes.
I want Joe Biden to heal this country, and I think that he can do that. And we know what he stands for because we saw him in action for 8 years with President Obama, and I trust him. He has integrity and intelligence.
He might have integrity and intelligence, but if he's debating Trump and he's just stuttering, mumbling, doesn't really have an idea about what he's going to say, then voters are going to recognize that and they're going to see Trump as the more personable candidate, and they're going to vote him again.
So you're afraid that if Biden gets the nomination, Trump wins the White House?
I really do, because I think there are a lot of similarities between how people feel about him and how they felt about Hillary Clinton. It's like the safe option, we're going to do this, instead of the risky option.
I feel like Biden needs to do...
Go ahead.
I feel like Biden needs to do more than run on Obama's policies. He needs to come with something new, because everything is about what he did and what Obama
did. By a show of hands, how many of you have met a presidential candidate? Raise your hands. I mean, where else are you going to find that? This one's even better. How many of you have met someone who eventually became president? Raise your hands. You realize how impossible that is?
We're actually one of the most educated populations in the country. We all don't agree politically, but for the most part, you have a very common sense sort of an attitude. And the state's small enough so that people that want to get to know the candidates can and really express an opinion about them.
I think what we typically see in other states, the larger states, are tarmac campaigns. Somebody lands on a tarmac, they give a speech to a large group. There's no retail politics like you see here in New Hampshire where real people get to ask real questions. It's just not some media people shouting some questions in a tarmac and then all of a sudden gone.
But are we really representative of the demographics of the rest of the country?
Are you?
I don't know. Are we as diverse as the rest of the country?
Look around. Does this look like America?
No. The thing is that there's other kinds of diversity, not just racial diversity. You know, we have socioeconomic diversity. We have belief diversity.
No one state is America. Every state has its own demographic and its own everything.
It's really important for Iowa to preserve its presence as kind of first in the nation caucus in the presidential process because we do a really great job of winnowing the field of candidates. It also is important that these candidates are tested and have the skill sets to participate in retail politics and also have the ground game to really organize and bring people to their candidate and bring them to the table.
Why Bernie?
Why Bernie? Because Bernie lines up with us on our issues, our values, and our theory of change. Issues like Medicare for All, Green New Deal, Fight for 15, and he's been consistent on issues for over 3 decades. And in terms of theory of change, he understands that it's going to take a grassroots people power movement to win big change.
Why Joe Biden?
Because I think he is the person that is able to get right in there and start working because he knows all the foreign leaders and everything, and that's what we need, somebody that is equipped right now.
Why Elizabeth Warren?
Oh, well, There's so many reasons. At first I was undecided, and I went to one of her appearances here in Des Moines, and I was surprised. First of all, the energy in the room just changed to the positive when she bound onto the stage, and she really listened to everybody. Once she'd given her little talk, she really listened to people.
Oh, this is huge. This is huge. I was so undecided, and as I was walking in the door, I was undecided, and that's a really big difference compared to where we've been in the past, where there were so many fewer viable candidates.
Okay, I gotta ask you, I've never met an undecided Iowa caucus voter who's walking in the door, but you're caucusing for Pete.
Yeah.
What changed you?
Yeah, oh man, that's such a great question. So many of the candidates are just fabulous, and I will be happy with any of them as long as we beat Trump. But I really think Mayor Pete is a special person. He's smart, he's articulate, he knows what he stands for, he wants to bring the country together, and I think he'll do it.
Small town Iowa. It evokes images of cornfields and presidential hopefuls. But Dubuque, once called the whitest place in America, earned an ugly reputation after more than a dozen cross burnings happened here in the late 80s and early 90s. And it happened again in 2016.
2 burning crosses were discovered by police this week.
There's always cross burnings in Dubuque, Iowa.
Today, most of Dubuque's 90% white population lives above the limestone bluffs on the west side of the city, while most black families, more than half of whom live in poverty and face an unemployment rate more than 3 times that of whites, live in the flats down below.
For some reason, we can talk about everything else in America, but when it comes to a conversation about race, we want to bury our heads in the sand and say it doesn't exist, or things are better now.
In the lead up to the Iowa caucuses, I wanted to learn about how this nearly all-white Iowa town has tried to change its racist image. Race is a vexing issue for the entire country, and it's certainly the case for Dubuque. I came here to find out whether their conversation on race is working and where they go from here.
I never thought in 100 million years I would ever come back to the city.
Jason Greer and his father, Jerome Greer, are back in Dubuque for the first time in 26 years.
I was scared to death. I had never been in a community where I felt like people just hated us without even knowing us. It alternated between being called the N-word to people telling us to go back where we came from. And I'm thinking they're talking about, move back to St. Louis? Not knowing that they were talking about go back to Africa, right? Men driving by us, putting up the Hitler greeting. And I felt like that was sort of my welcome to Dubuque.
Jason was 18 at the time. His dad had moved the family to Dubuque after getting a job as a school principal at Irving Elementary. But in an almost all-white town, the Greers stuck out.
I wasn't just the only black principal. I was the only black person in the school district, period.
Within days of Jerome's arrival, there were 2 cross burnings, one in front of his apartment building and one in front of his school.
That's my school there. That was my school there. And of course, I stood up on this hill and looked down at the park. The cross was still there.
30 years ago, Dubuque started an initiative called We Want to Change, which set out to bring 100 minority professionals to Dubuque over the course of 5 years. The hope was that by making the city more diverse, it would become more inclusive. Within months, at least a dozen crosses were burned in protest.
In 1991, cross burnings were followed by a Ku Klux Klan rally to protest the city's effort to attract more minorities to their community.
You got the whole nation looking at this, man, seeing how sick you are.
So you move here as one of the few black families. You don't have a lot of connections with the African Americans who already live here because they're afraid to be seen with you. The city is burning crosses. What's dinner like at the Greer house?
We talked about it, but we did not allow it to cause us to start packing up and leaving. I did a flyer that says, if you must burn crosses, I will furnish the wood, and you furnish the kerosene and the matches, and let's have a cross-burning party.
Despite all of this, Jerome remembers his 3 years at Irving Elementary fondly. He loved his school, and he left a lasting legacy that was apparent when our request to film with him there turned into a celebratory welcoming home.
Raven, hey, Raven, look at these friends.
I'm sure you know this, but you are part of one of the greatest school systems in the United States.
Yes.
Boy, it brings back memories.
Bring back memories.
At first glance, Dubuque seems far removed from America's struggles with race. Its turn-of-the-century buildings sit in an idyllic location on the Mississippi River where Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin meet. But this city's been struggling with race issues for a long time. For most of the 20th century, Dubuque was a manufacturing city, primarily occupied by German and Irish immigrants. In the 1920s, though, it became a hub for the KKK. By the early 90s, when the Greers lived here, there were fewer than 350 black people in Dubuque. Today, there are 3,000 black people, but the city is still 90% white, and its issues with race are far from over.
That's the challenge we're trying to get past, is how do you get past that ridiculous reputation set up by a few idiots that unfortunately has come to represent a lot of Dubuque's history.
A cross burning isn't just a cross burning, it symbolizes death. You know, when people say, oh, it's just a few people. No, that's, for someone of color, that represents someone's going to be hanging from that cross at the end of the night. And it's not something to be taken lightly and to be dismissed.
Lynn Sutton has spent her entire life in Dubuque. Her first experience with racism came on the day she was born.
My birth certificate says I was born in Hazel Green, Wisconsin. Our street address was 650 University Avenue, Dubuque, Iowa, because no doctor would deliver us here. So Dad always had to take Mom across the river, and at that time it was just one bridge we had.
So this all happened because your family was black?
Yeah.
Lynn's a nurse, but she spends much of her free time fighting landlords who've neglected their properties in the flats, the low-lying, working-class neighborhoods along the Mississippi where most people of color in Dubuque live.
You don't have the resources here for people. I mean, you don't have good housing, you don't have a decent grocery store, you know, you don't have emergency services. You know, I mean, come on.
These neighborhoods have also been the target of recent acts of vandalism.
People would spray paint on the sidewalk there and say, we want you to leave, and then the area would follow where the people lived.
Why are you still having these issues 30 years after the city engaged in a constructive integration plan based on already an established kind of reputation for not taking care of its African-American population? Why are we still talking about this?
Well, the constructive integration plan really wasn't a plan. Some of the people here have never dealt with anyone other than who look like them or family members. So now all of a sudden you're going to bring people here to integrate. And when I heard that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is like the Little Rock Nine back in Arkansas when they took those kids to that school. Look at what, that didn't go well. Why do you think this is going to happen?
While it's unclear how successful that plan was, what is clear is that it failed to solve Dubuque's ongoing problems with race. It was just one approach the city's tried. More recently, a nonprofit group called Inclusive Dubuque brought together community leaders to tackle racism on all fronts. Last year, the first Soul Food Sunday brought together people from all sides of town to eat and dance. There was even an I'm a Dubuquer video campaign. But things haven't gotten much better for the people of color here. I asked a few people who've been on the front lines of this effort to join us for a dinner conversation about why change is so hard.
Thank you all for coming and for being a part of this, by the way. And
Thank you. Katrina Neely Farron Eller is the former coordinator of Inclusive Dubuque, but her childhood was very different. She was raised by white supremacists.
Part of the belief in Christian identity is that there was going to be a race war, which meant that you killed everybody who was not white. It was like crazy to be sitting around a table talking about, well, if God calls us, like our friends down the street, you know, we will kill them.
Eventually, Neely rejected her parents' teachings.
It's hard for someone to step out and say, you know, Mom and Dad, they probably fell on their head a little couple of times. You know, something's wrong with Mom and Dad. Most people don't say it. So, you know, I applaud you for it. That's hella growth. And that's what I would like to see more Dubuquers do.
The thing that strikes me when I look at the city, it's a town full of churches that's known for cross burnings. There's something very spiritual about the whole damn thing, actually, and devastating as well. And how do you spread that message in a community that is, in its halting way, dealing with this issue.
If I let my imagination run in terms of this, we'd have table conversations like this all over town, right? In homes and bars, right? I mean, because it's in the bars where the folks that are hanging out that, you know, I want to be part of the conversation.
I think there's a lot of fear around being super honest because we're going to say something stupid, inevitably, right? And white people have to be vulnerable and own that, and that is a level of bravery that I don't think we've seen in a really, really long time.
We're in this together. We have to take care of each other. And so if it's about sitting at a table and having conversations and talking about what we can do collectively to change our communities, then we have to start them, and we have to start them sooner the better.
That's one of the reasons I organized the dinner. But the problem, as newcomer Jackie Hunter sees it, is that it's always the same people having these conversations.
That's when I get upset, when I walk into a room and it's still the same people all the time. In my 13 months here, it's the same people.
Jackie moved her family here a year ago when she took a job as the director of the Multicultural Family Center. It's one of the few spaces in Dubuque where diversity is celebrated, or the norm.
Dubuque has offered some wonderful opportunities for our family, but it has come at some cost as well. What I believe is happening now is that my children are tending to identify white spaces as positive spaces and black spaces as negative spaces. My daughter has spoken often about feeling like she doesn't know where she belongs. I wonder, when my sons walk into a school, do we see the brilliance in them that I see in them? Or do we see two more black kids? My daughter is extremely talented. Do we see her as a talented young woman, or, well, she's a talented black girl, and what does that mean? Well, doors be open to her the way they are open to other kids. I don't want my kids to look back and say, with regret, Mom, I wish we hadn't moved there.
I've met some wonderful people in Dubuque, both black and white, who are trying to resolve his issues. But fighting racism and tackling inequity, that's hard, exhausting work, especially with heightened racial tensions around the country. Even 30 years in, no one in this city is ready to declare victory. But Dubuque shows us what their community and America as a whole stand to gain by not giving up.
The search to solve our most pressing issues. How to endure and how to be redeemed. The world is watching California because California fights back, remembers where we're from, and defies those in our way. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anna Garcia. Welcome to the Los Angeles Times Pulse of the Nation. Tonight, I am joined by LA Times Sacramento Bureau Chief John Myers to bring you the very latest from the Iowa caucuses. Good evening, John.
Good evening, and we're joined also by Samantha Melbourne-Weaver, the Director of Audience Engagement at the Times. And people are engaged tonight.
Engaged.
On one big topic in particular.
Lack of results. We're about 3 hours into caucusing, and the Democratic Party in Iowa has not released any results. They said they're doing a quality control check, and there's nothing.
Yeah, look at our site there. We are waiting like the rest of the world.
This is our results page on latimes.com. Go ahead and visit it, and you can see we have literally zero results right now.
Well, it looks like the issue that you're talking about, the quality control issue, is that for the first time they're using a new app. And this app was supposed to help tabulate the results because there are two votes. There's the first, there's the second, which is essentially the final. So apparently there have been some glitches. The app isn't working. We're getting some reports here that people even had trouble logging in. In fact, they're actually doing it old school. They're phoning in their results, all the precinct captains. So you can imagine 3 hours in and we don't have any results.
And it's this amazing this clash of things here of those technology problems, and everyone is waiting. This is the first presidential contest of this cycle. I mean, and people, I mean, it's palpable, and you can feel the way people are about it.
Definitely, yeah. A lot of angry people on Twitter talking about, is this a conspiracy? When are we going to get the answers? You know, we'll find out.
Okay.
It's going to be interesting to see. We have other things, of course, to talk about tonight. We will be looking for those results. There is going to be a lot for you to do. As part of the Times' comprehensive coverage of this, we're going to have caucus updates from all of our reporters who are embedded with the top Democratic candidates, as they are, as we said, awaiting those results. And we are going to be checking in with caucus sites all across Iowa.
And we're also going to have some live results from a satellite caucus right here in Southern California, in Palm Springs, of all places, where some Iowans are vacationing.
The snowbirds that have come to California. And there'll be a chance for you to participate as well. We're going to answer questions about the Iowa caucuses as part of this live stream event. You can submit a question. You can do it the old way, you know, telephone. The telephone number you can see here on the screen, 213-394-0662.
So essentially what you're going to be doing when you call in is you're going to leave a voicemail. So please make sure to tell us your name, the city in which you live, and, of course, your question. We also ask you to please clearly spell your name. We want to get that right. And once you end your call, your message has been submitted.
This is such an interesting evening. As a political reporter, I love it because everyone's talking about politics for a change. But the eyes on Iowa, as we said just a moment ago, the tension that this presidential campaign has already brought forward, this very first contest, people are engaging all over the world, I think, about it, just waiting to see what's going to happen. And now that we're really into the show, that it's really begun.
Oh, yeah. They voted in Paris today. I think it was 17 people voted in Paris. So it's just...
Every vote counts.
It's really been something. So we want to explain how the caucus works. I've covered the Iowa caucuses. I was there 4 years ago, and it's a voting process unlike any other in the country. You can't just mail in your vote. You must be physically present, and there are 2 rounds of votes, or alignments, as they call it in Iowa. And there's a very complicated way of counting the vote. It's not an easy one-person, one-vote system. So since it's so hard to explain, the LA Times video team has turned to gummy bears to help explain.
Caucuses can be confusing, so we're here to break it down for you with gummy bears, and I promise it'll make sense. First off, what is a caucus? It's a meeting where voters decide their preference for a political candidate. Only a handful of states hold caucuses instead of a primary. Iowa's up first. In this case, voters, the gummy bears, are picking their favorite candidate, the food. Again, this will make sense. So at a Democratic caucus, the BLT supporters don't have enough votes. Here is where the chaos begins. BLT supporters can leave or join another group.
You should choose hamburgers because we are tastier than a kale salad.
Come to Kale Salad, we're healthier.
Votes are tallied up across the state and each candidate gets delegates. The candidate with the most delegates wins. So, why does this matter? The results can influence the rest of the election season, and the winner benefits from the attention as voting continues elsewhere. Next, New Hampshire.
It's not complicated, right? It's gummy bears, it's kale salad. I mean, you know, these are big choices that America is making. I mean, in some ways it's complicated, in some it's just about personal opinion, and it's not complicated. It can be simple in a way. I mean, and people have been, I mean, they're not shy when it comes to social media and telling me how they feel.
They are not. That's the home of personal opinion, twitter.com. So we asked all of our readers to tweet us and tell us, you know, how do you think the outcome of tonight's Iowa caucuses are going to affect your vote? Here's some responses. Nature Alley said no. I'll vote for Warren because her plans are solid. She has one of the best environmental records, and clean air and water plus wildlife are important to me. Her name is Nature Alley, so that's not surprising. The selfishness must end in Washington and be replaced by true public servants like Warren.
I mean, a person who is interesting in that doesn't see Elizabeth Warren as part of Washington, which, of course, is part of the dynamic of some of these candidates.
Right. She's a senator, so she's definitely in Washington already. We had another person on Twitter, A-Minor1963, who said, I'll vote for Joe Biden, regardless of who wins in any other state, but I vote for whoever wins the nomination. Trump has to go.
Well, isn't that a big question? Because a lot of the Bernie supporters say, if Bernie is not the nominee, I am not going to vote. I'm not going to vote for the Democrat. And that's going to affect the election. I mean, we really saw some of that in the last election, you know, because the Bernie supporters were very upset about Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm. For some people, it's a very much a black and white choice. It's a this or nothing kind of feeling, which, you know, was what we expect Iowa to somewhat sort out at some point tonight.
Yeah, hopefully, when we get results, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't have any. Not yet.
We had one more reader, Mac7591, who said, I'll tell you now, no disrespect to Iowa, but no, their opinion is not enough to decide the nation's fate.
And I cannot help but point out, as a Californian, as all of us are Californians, there are 49 delegates to the Democratic National Convention up for grabs tonight. Come California's time, March 3rd, there are 495 delegates. So, no offense to Iowa. We do care. They're first. But there is a lot more to discuss, and Iowa will not be the end-all, be-all of this campaign.
And really, it can't be, because when you step back and you see that maybe 200,000 people in Iowa will have participated in the caucuses, that is a tiny fraction. And as far as the demographics go, Iowa is so white, so unlike many of the other states and cities that, so much attention on just a few people. But we're all here for that very reason. So earlier this evening, we caught up with a precinct captain, Rachel Bruns. She's at DM 43 in Des Moines. And we asked her why she thinks that Iowa's traditional role in presidential politics is important to preserve.
I think it's really important for Iowa to preserve its presence as kind of first in the nation caucus in the presidential process, because we do a really great job of winnowing the field of candidates. It also is important that these candidates are tested and have the skill sets to participate in retail politics, and also have the ground game to really organize and bring people to their candidate and bring them to the table. So tonight we are expecting a 20% increase in turnout from 2016. 2016, this precinct, we had a little over 460 people participating, and so we're expecting probably around 550 to 600 people tonight. Once everyone's checked in, we will call the caucus to order, and I will be nominated as the chair for our caucus, or others can be nominated as the chair as well, and I will run our business meeting. So the caucus is a neighborhood business meeting. This is a great opportunity for our neighbors to come together and talk about issues they care about, and part of the meeting is the part that everyone across the country cares about most, which is the alignment of preference groups. So once we get to that part of the agenda, we will have our first alignment. We will provide each preference group 15 minutes for our attendees to align with their candidate of choice. That could be any of the candidates that you all know running for the Democratic nomination, or it could be Donald Duck or anyone else that they want to align with. After that, we will then determine what groups are viable based on our initial viability count, and any groups that are non-viable will then have an opportunity to align with a viable group or merge together to create a new viable group.
And our Times reporters in Iowa are also locked in tonight to watch the turnout and the results. And we've been tracking the major campaigns throughout the week. And one clear takeaway that we have gotten from Iowa, a lot of people talking about, is the enthusiasm from supporters of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He was narrowly edged out, as we know, 4 years ago when delegates won in the state. But the pre-caucus poll suggested, even in this more crowded field, he is the candidate to beat.
And according to the most recent Times poll, Bernie has strong support here in California also, topping his closest competitor, Elizabeth Warren, by 6 points. Sam, so what's happening in social media as far as, do we get a sense of maybe who is leading as far as popularity goes, since we don't have any votes that we can tell you about or results?
Right, it's a toss-up. I'll tell you, some of our readers tweeted at us and told us a couple things. We had LibraWife 2010, who said, I hope Elizabeth Warren wins. I'm voting all women everything. So that's kind of interesting.
It is,
Amy
perhaps
Klobuchar
not the
is
best way to vote. I say that as a woman.
We had Jean Podrasky say, I think it will be Biden, but Warren as the underdog will come in a surprising second. And then Suzanne1616 says Pete Buttigieg, the person who can lead us out of disaster Trump has created, the one person who has legitimate and doable policies, the young man who has the intelligence to bring together the hope of our country and our politicians. He gives me hope.
These are all, again, top tier, as we've called them, candidates in this race. And the great question, of course, out of Iowa, in addition to the fact when the results are going to come in, is how many tickets, we say, are out of Iowa? How many candidates are viable to move forward out of this? These folks are all dialing in to some of those candidates we've been talking about the most.
That's right.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is that according to the Iowa Democratic Party, they're saying that about 25% of the precincts have reported in so far. But because of their quality control checks, what they're doing is it's like they're double-checking their math. Mm-hmm. They're double-checking the math on the app, which is new this year, and they're referencing the caucus cards to make sure it all adds up. So that's what the delay is, because we just have really very few results, if any.
Right.
Other than some satellite results.
Yeah, we're hearing from some of our own reporters that are at precincts following candidates. They're saying usually it's Buttigieg and Sanders who are winning, but that's no way to tell. That's one precinct at a time.
And there's no person that wants to say, oh, yeah, no quality control. Let's don't do that. And yet there is, as I said, this real sense of anticipation here. And it always feels like to me, I mean, that a caucus, you feel like maybe you'll find out something faster than you do a primary election. Certainly Californians know we wait a long time for our results, but everybody's in the room. You would think you would know.
Well, it's very public. It's not like another way of voting that's private. You go into a booth or you mail it in and no one knows. You don't have to tell anyone. Here you have to say it publicly, and sometimes you have to defend yourself against the argument on the other side.
And get people to join your side. I mean, it really comes down to join my team, no join my team.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Well, a little bit later, we are going to check in with a member of the Times editorial board, John Healy, to learn more about the newspaper's endorsement process. Over the past several weeks, the Times Ed Board has met with several of the Democratic candidates as part of their deliberation. Those interviews were recorded. Here's a sampling of their conversation with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
I will do everything I can to bring this country together. Thank you.
The bench or the chair?
Hello?
Or that chair?
Senator John Healy. Nice to see you again. Hi, welcome back. Do you think that the U.S. can repair the damage that Donald Trump has done? Can they do it quickly and easily? And how would you go about it?
The answer is, I think, yes. I think it will be difficult, and I really do think it will require extraordinary leadership. I think what Trump did in the 2016 campaign is rather intelligently pick up on the fact that there were tens and tens of millions of people in this country who are suffering, who are in pain, who are going nowhere in a hurry, are seeing a decline in their standard of living, seeing a decline literally in their life expectancy, worried about their kids. And they're looking around them and they're saying, who is concerned about me? Democratic establishment worried about my kids. They're worried that I'm working for $9 an hour, that I don't have any health care, that my kid can't go to college. And he played on that. Now, he turned out to be a fraud and a liar. But he certainly exposed, I think, the weakness of the Democratic and the political establishment in general, including the Republican establishment.
There's been a lot of focus on a $15 minimum wage, but how does the federal government, how can you create more $30 an hour jobs, $45 an hour jobs?
That's right. I mean, no one, I am, and again, if I'm allowed to toot my own horn here, when I was here 4 years ago, and I talked about a $15 minimum wage, everyone thought that I was kind of extreme. Since then, 7 states, including this state, have passed $15 minimum wage, as has the U.S. House of Representatives. So your point is well taken. Nobody should think for one moment that, we got a $15 an hour minimum wage, we've solved our economic problems. It is a minimum. It is a minimum. And I have been to this state, I've been to Iowa, needless to say, in New Hampshire. You do talk to people. I'll never forget a woman in Des Moines, Iowa, making $10.25 an hour trying to raise 3 kids. She can't. All right, so I'm not here to tout that $15 an hour minimum wage is the end of the world. It's not, but it is the minimum. We have to do that. The question of how we create good-paying jobs is your question. $25, $30 an hour jobs is the more important question. I think one way we do that, and obviously it's going to be a combination of federal policy and the private sector. As President of the United States, what I will do is demand and do everything that I can to end the kind of corporate greed and irresponsibility that we see right now. We were just over in San Bernardino. We had a rally there yesterday where Amazon apparently has a lot of influence there. There's a lot of pollution and kids come down with asthma and all that stuff. And people in the warehouses are making $11 or $12 an hour, while Amazon is as you know, an enormously profitable corporation. They paid 0 in federal income taxes last year. So I think what a progressive president has got to do is say to these corporations, you know what, make money, that's great, create jobs, we want you to do that. But it cannot just go to CEO compensation or your stockholders. We have got to break this mentality, which has been prevalent for so many decades, that the only thing that a corporation has to do is make as much money as possible for its stockholders and pay its CEOs outlandish levels of compensation. And we have to do it culturally, and we have to do it legislatively to say, you know what, make money, that's fine. You want to be rich, that's fine. But you cannot have it all. You can't break unions or deny workers the right to join a union. You can't continue to harass women on the job. You can't pay abysmally low wages and expect, to be treated respectfully by the federal government. You're going to have to be good corporate citizens. You can't shut down plants in America and move to low-wage countries. You have a certain responsibility.
Senator, you've made your position on President Trump quite clear. I want to ask you, is there anything that he's done, any policy that he has, any action that he's taken that you think is worthy and is worth building on?
I have such contempt for somebody who is trying intentionally to divide this country up based on the color of people's skins or where they came from or their religion or their sexual orientation. That disgusts me so much that it's, So in the midst of that, and somebody was is a pathological liar, and it was a corrupt person. I mean, he has talked about the need for infrastructural repair. Yes, that's true. Has he done anything? No. He's talked about the need to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Has he taken on the pharmaceutical industry? No, he has not. He has talked about trade policies. And in fairness, probably what has recently happened is probably modestly better than the previous NAFTA. So you want to give him credit, and the Democrats in the House credit for that, fine. But I think the overwhelming results of his administration is contemptible.
President Trump's approach to homelessness has been pretty much to scapegoat homeless people themselves and vaguely hint he would move them all into a big empty federal building. How would you address homelessness?
There is so much work to be done in this country. I mean, starting with childcare, starting with healthcare, where we need more doctors, we need more nurses, we need people. We're not pushing paper, but providing care to older people. We have a proposal that would build 10 million units of housing. And in terms of low-income housing, I'm proud to tell you that I co-sponsored successfully with Barbara Lee of Oakland. It was called the Low-Income, I always forget the name, it was a Low-Income Housing Trust Fund or something, which Obama's people put, I think, several $100 million into, nowhere near enough. But it was the first piece of legislation to actually address low-income housing. But to answer your question, and I've learned, as you travel around the country, boy, you learn this. The housing crisis is not just in LA, it's not just in San Francisco or Seattle. It is virtually in almost every part of the country. And it has to do not only with homelessness, which is a disgrace, about 500,000 people are homeless in America. It has to do with the fact that 18 million families are spending 50% of their income in housing. It has to do with gentrification all over this country, which are driving rents up to levels that working families just cannot afford. We have a proposal that would build some 10 million units of housing and put a hell of a lot of people back to work at good wages, union wages. Okay, well, thank you so much. And I'll be happy to go. Yeah, let's do it quickly.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders talking to the editorial board of the Los Angeles Times. Interesting there. And, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that Senator Sanders is still winning in California. While we wait for Iowa a little bit, we had a poll last week for the Institute of Government Studies at UC Berkeley and the Los Angeles Times. Bernie Sanders, 26%, Elizabeth Warren, 20%, Joe Biden, 15%, somewhat mirroring what we are seeing in Iowa and other parts of the country when we see something from Iowa and other parts of the country.
And that is the question. So it's been more than 3 hours since the caucus began, and we have no results because there's been some kind of a technical glitch. Here's a little bit more information on that. We're being told that one precinct captain actually was on hold for an hour on the telephone because if the app's not working, you're supposed to call in the old-fashioned way, on hold for an hour before they could finally get a live person. We're also told that the phone line itself, in some cases, isn't working. And this is what they've resulted to. The precinct captains are saying, take pictures with your phone of your results and also take pictures of the cards, and we're going to try to use those. Some people are even driving in results. So what does that tell you about how things are falling apart in Iowa right now?
That's not good.
No, it is not good. It is
And
not
again,
good.
it's an expectations game as much as anything, and it's a reflection, too, on how people feel. Do they feel insecure about the process of voting and choosing candidates? Do they feel insecure about a lot of things? And this is an insecurity moment, it certainly seems like.
It is, especially because this is a new way for them to tabulate the votes using this special app that they had developed for this very purpose. And the metrics, it's not working.
Yeah, it seems like to me, Sam, I don't know what you have read, that whether you are an average person or a political professional, you are taking to social media tonight to say, this is a head scratcher. This is, I mean, like, you know, it's a uniform kind of reaction to the lack of information.
Yeah, nobody seems to know what's going on. I would encourage people to go to latimes.com, where we have some updates from some official spokespeople. The communications director for the Iowa Democratic Party told one of our reporters, the results are paramount. We've experienced a delay in the results due to quality checks and the fact that the IDP, the Iowa Democratic Party, is reporting out 3 data sets for the first time. She also said that 25% of the precincts have reported, and that results so far indicate that we're on pace for voter turnout on par with 2016.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we do know some interesting things.
So that's not huge then, because if we're on par with 2016, that actually was less than 4 years earlier.
But I do want to point out the thing that you said there that I think is really fascinating, that we should tell people again. This is not just one change in Iowa they're making tonight. There are a series of changes to the Iowa caucus process that they rolled out all at the same time, which makes this all the more interesting. Guess I'll use the term.
Scary. I tossed that in. A little frightening. Well, a little while ago, pollster Frank Luntz spoke with voters at DM 43 in Iowa. He actually spoke with Bernie and Biden supporters, and here's what they had to say.
He's been consistent on issues for over 3 decades. And in terms of theory of change, he understands that it's going to take a grassroots people power movement to win big change.
Is he electable?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You're sure of that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You bet he is. You bet. If Donald Trump can get elected, Bernie Sanders can get elected.
Was there any doubt at any point that you were not going to support Bernie during this campaign?
No, I've been a Bernie supporter. I mean, I'm part of an organization that helped introduce him in Iowa back over 6 years ago. It's just like, Bernie is Bernie, and he's like, we're like 2 peas in a pod.
So how does this day, this caucus day, is it significant for you?
Oh, I mean, it's significant, but every day is significant. So caucus is important, but what happens on the 4th and the 5th of February is just as important. Like, Bernie and others say, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Medicare for all, if we're not building a grassroots movement to win it. Same thing about climate change. We have to be building a grassroots movement. So tonight is significant, but tomorrow is significant, and next day is significant, and next day. That's how we're going to create big change. Keep at it.
Awesome. We got another Bernie person. Tell me why. Go.
Why Bernie?
Yes.
I feel he has the most progressive policies and is the best at making the case for those policies and convincing people who are on the fence or don't like him that he has good policies. Like, he makes a good case for himself, and the case he's making is itself good.
Why do so many young people support him?
I'm stealing this joke from Twitter, but because he is the millennials' dream version of an older person, he recognizes the problems his generation has caused, and he's actively trying to fix them and help systemically fix a lot of problems.
Why has he done so well among young voters?
I think it's because of his consistency, and people believe what he's doing. And when I look at what he was doing when he was in college, when he was marching and everything, I see sort of, what I wish I could have been doing.
Tell me, why Elizabeth Warren?
Oh, well, there's so many reasons. At first I was undecided, and I went to one of her appearances here in Des Moines, and I was surprised. First of all, the energy in the room just changed to the positive when she bound onto the stage, and she really listened to everybody. Once she'd given her little talk, she really listened to people. She had people who ahead of time were handing out ticket stubs to people that wanted to ask questions, and then they drew from the box when she was on stage and had those people be able to ask the questions. And she really answered the questions. She didn't talk a circle around them.
The most energetic and has the best heart and the most kindness towards all humans, and that is so important to me. I'm looking for leadership. I'm looking for somebody who's willing to be bold and ask for significant change. And I love her enthusiasm and her energy, and she can run circles around anyone in terms of her intellect. But probably more than anything, I think she's kind and moral and caring about all people, and that's what I want in my president.
Why Joe Biden?
Because I think he is the person that is able to get right in there and start working, because he knows all the foreign leaders and everything, and that's what we need, somebody that is equipped right now.
You sound like someone who was convinced at the beginning. Is that true?
No, I wasn't. He didn't start right at the beginning, but now I am convinced. When he decided to run, I was convinced right away to support him. Because he is the best choice.
There are some people who think that he's not going to do all that well tonight. What would you say to them, those remaining undecideds?
Well, I would say they need to get with him, because America needs to be united. It is so separated, and it needs to be reunited. So I would like for everyone to join him so that we can get America back to where it needs to be.
As we know, one unusual part of the run-up to tonight's caucuses was the fact that 3 of the leading candidates were in Washington for several days, of course, because they serve in the U.S. Senate, which was the scene of the historic impeachment trial of President Trump. So there were some challenges for Senator Sanders, as well as Senators Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. In turn, that left the other candidates to barnstorm the state on their own. And there was another unusual moment over the weekend, we know, which was the sudden cancellation of that final poll from the Des Moines Register, which was considered to be the gold standard of polls when it comes to taking the pulse of the Hawkeye state. And we are waiting for the pulse of the Hawkeye state. But the real question, Samantha Milborn Weaver, is who they think can beat Trump.
Right? That's the existential question for everybody that's voting. We asked our readers, you know, if that's how you think about it, I'm going to vote for someone who just can beat Trump. Who are you voting for? David S. Evans, 29, told us Bernie. He's fighting for the working class along racial and gender boundaries. He's fighting climate change. He's not your standard glad-handing politician, but he has a vision. People want to vote for a vision, not policy papers. I think that's kind of a dig at Warren there.
Mm-hmm. Do you get the sense, though, that I guess the best way to say is, like, do you really get the sense that people can be still swayed at this time? I mean, I think so. I think, you know, we saw that going into the caucus, that not everyone had made up their mind and they'd have an opportunity to change their mind if things weren't going their way. So what do you think, you know, that effect would be on California? Whether you... Yeah. It's anyone's guess. I realize that.
I mean, you know, everyone takes their cues from what other people do. They want to see what the messages are of the candidates out of tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they want to know how they react to the Iowa results. But it is, I think, part of your question to this, Anna, is what we see at this churning of people about, is it about beating President Trump if you're a Democrat,
right,
or is it about the person who aligns with the issues? The question that we ask over and over and over. And, I mean, people are very passionate about how they feel on the answer to that question.
That's so true. So we talked to another reader, Nina McGuff, who said, Warren 2020 all the way. She has the ideas, energy, and integrity to take on Trump. She's truly our unity candidate. So someone really thinking about the party and the policies moving it forward.
I think that she's the one to do it. Mm-hmm.
I suppose so. We had another Terry Reese 0130 who said, I like Elizabeth Warren. She's the only one running that has put forth a detailed yet easy to understand plans on how she will implement her ideas. So kind of a mix there.
Well, we've got someone who hopefully can figure some stuff out for us here, or at least answer some questions.
We need some help.
We do. So LA Times reporter Melanie Mason is in Des Moines. She's been following the Biden campaign. She's on the phone now with us. First of all, what in the world is going on with the vote tally tonight?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine at this point. I, too, need some help. I think that this has really been a pretty bewildering day for Iowans and for the media that is trying to cover it. So I actually am about to leave the Biden event and head over to the Iowa Democratic Party, because that's really where the real action is at that party headquarters tonight.
Melanie, talk about a little bit about when people started to get this confusion feeling. I mean, and did it grow over time? Like, what the heck? I mean, what are they saying?
It felt about, I would say, around 9 p.m. Central that, there had been a lot of anecdotal information that had been coming out on Twitter or, in the caucus sites where TV cameras were. And so you were seeing anecdotal information coming in. But then when we saw the first sort of inkling that the Democratic Party itself would not be releasing this first round of votes, I think that there was a question of, how much is this a temporary delay or not? I think that as that delay started to grow, and we started to get to the 10 o'clock hour, and now we're halfway to the 11 o'clock hour, I think that there's this realization that this could be a very long night.
And do you believe that it has to do with the fact that this app is either not working or that they're doing quality control because maybe they fear that the app is not working as well as they had hoped?
That's some of the reporting that we've done and that we've also seen from other news outlets. So I've spoken to a county party chair who said that the app, while they were able to get it work, it took a very long time for it to work, and then it took them very long to actually get on the phone with the party to relay those results. And then I know that there have been other LA Times reporters who've spoken to county chairs elsewhere in the state who have had similar situations. One of the things to keep in mind is that there is a paper trail. I witnessed this at the caucus site that I was at. There is a lot of assiduous documentation on paper about the tallies, but you're not going to get that instantaneous result that you might have seen from being transmitted in an app. So I think that technology, when it works, could be a blessing, but I think we're seeing here when the glitches happen, that's when folks can start to get frustrated.
Melanie, you've been out there on the trail covering the campaign for a while, and I'm just wondering, when we look back at this tomorrow, what the candidates will make when the narrative is not just about the campaign, it's about the process of voting tomorrow. They're going to have to dust themselves off and try to kind of find a way to get back on track, it would seem like.
Absolutely. I think we were anticipating, no matter what, that it would be battle of the spin. Because we had seen for the poll results that were coming out in advance of the caucus, there was a real cluster among, the top candidates were all clustered very tightly together. And so it wasn't necessarily clear if there would be one runaway winner. I think we were all anticipating battle of the spin the coming day anyway about, was it raw vote total that mattered or number of delegates, or was somebody going to talk about how well they did in Republican-leaning areas of the state? Now, of course, they have to conquer the spin of, the Democratic Party and its sort of competence on the state level. But again, remember, there are a lot of big news stories going on. There is the State of the Union on Tuesday. There's the ongoing impeachment trial. And so I do wonder if while right now all of the eyes of the world are on Iowa, they're going to be moving very quickly. And I do wonder if the maybe embarrassment of this caucus night glitch will also sort of be pretty quickly lost to the crazy news cycle.
Melanie, can you give us any insight into voter turnout? Because we feel like so far from what we've heard, it didn't surge the way some people thought it might. But we don't know because it's hard to get information right now.
Again, we're dealing with a lot of anecdotal information. So I did see that the state party put out a statement saying that it looked like from the 25% of turnout results that they had so far that the caucus was on track for 2016 turnout. I think that the big barometer everyone was looking for was 2008, which of course had the surge in turnout. But again, I think because we are seeing such sort of haphazard glimpses throughout the state. And of course, remember, most of the reporters are stationed in the Des Moines area. So I think we're maybe getting an overrepresentation of that urban center in the state. I would caution in drawing too many conclusions from the information we have right now.
Hey, Melanie, can I ask you one question just about the candidates and kind of the tone of the campaign that you've seen there on the ground in Iowa lately? I mean, all the polling, at least except for the last Des Moines Register poll, which we didn't see, suggested Senator Sanders is that guy, he's going to be in front. Is there any way that Sanders can do anything that, gets him better momentum? I mean, it's almost like the expectation is that Sanders comes out on top. How does he not kind of get lost in the story in a way of, Mayor Pete comes in or something else? I mean, what is the feeling there about whether there's a hard-baked perception is what's going to happen tonight out of this?
Yeah, I think that the expectation game is almost as important as the delegate chase, right? And so I do think that there was an expectation for Bernie Sanders to perform strongly. But I do think that he has an advantage in heading into the next contest, which is New Hampshire. It's his neighboring state from his home state of Vermont. He performed very well there in 2016. And so I'd anticipate that he is going to be getting large crowds. And trying to build on this sense of momentum. I wouldn't be surprised if the Sanders campaign, in addition to most of the campaigns, start slicing and dicing the results to try and emphasize parts of their narrative. So, for example, the Sanders campaign was really intent on turning out Latino caucus goers here in Iowa. Iowa, of course, is not necessarily seen as a particularly diverse state, but there is a not insignificant population of Latinos, and the Sanders campaign put a lot of energy into turning them out. If we do see that he performs well in those areas, then I would anticipate that would then feed his narrative going into a state like Nevada that has a lot of Latino voters. So I think that it's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure now for all of the campaigns, what they'd like to highlight. I think that was likely going to be the case no matter what happened, and I think that the muddledness of the results only adds to that.
Muddled indeed. Thank you so much, Melanie. We really appreciate it. We know you're hustling to another location right now.
Yes, I'm going to have to take off, but thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Well,
earlier this evening, pollster Frank Luntz spoke with 3 voters with very different opinions. He spoke with a Biden supporter, a Bernie supporter, and a member of the Yang Gang.
So I've seen a lot of firefighter shirts. Are there firemen caucusing for Joe Biden?
So our union is a supporter of Joe Biden. The IAFF endorsed him probably back in April.
Why is the union so supportive of Joe Biden?
Joe Biden supports us. I mean, his track record started in the 80s, helping give benefits for fallen firefighters. I know locally, he was a big part of the SAFER grant. Here in Des Moines, we just got like $1 million worth of SCBAs, like our self-contained breathing apparatus, for fire. So I care that he cares about public safety and he cares about us. So I guess it's my chance to care back about him.
So you're going to be here for about 3 hours, maybe longer.
Yes, sir.
Why is this so important to you?
Because, the middle class, I think we're often forgotten. And, it's the working class, and he cares about us. So it's our time, like I said, I feel like it's my job to show that he has our back, so I'm going to have his back.
There are so many other candidates in this room. Why is this special?
I think it's just important. I think everyone cares so much. We're pretty divided as a country. And I think ultimately most people here will choose whoever wins this over Donald Trump. So we're divided, and I just think there's a lot of passion. People want change. So.
One more. Why do you think Biden can defeat Trump?
He has the track record. He has the experience. He can go toe-to-toe with him. I think he's well-spoken. He's tactful, and I think he can win over maybe kind of the undecided, the middle-of-the-road type of supporters. But people that wouldn't vote for Hillary, that chose Trump out of default, I think would choose Biden instead.
So you guys, come on over. So you support Bernie Sanders?
Yes, I do.
And do you support Bernie Sanders?
No.
Who do you support?
Yang.
So we've got Biden, Sanders, and Yang. Tell me why Sanders.
I really like his healthcare plan and his plan for climate change and things like that, so.
And Biden doesn't do it for you?
Not as much, no.
Because?
I'm really just for the universal healthcare, and that's what really has me sold on Bernie.
And tell me why Yang.
I really like how non-polarizing he is, and also I like his basic income to help with income inequality and also lower the cost of housing.
So I'm going to recreate the caucus right now, 2 hours from now. I don't know if Yang is going to get to 15%. What is your best case to get her to come to caucus with you guys? Biden first.
I just think he's the one that can beat Trump. I think a lot of the people that are middle of the road won't vote for Bernie. I think that's why Trump beat Hillary, because I don't think he necessarily has the support that the votes turned out. I think people, the undecided, the moderates, I think would have a better chance than Bernie Sanders.
And what's Bernie Sanders' case to win this Yang vote?
I disagree. I think, Bernie is ahead in the polls, and I think that Bernie has a lot more to offer and a lot more that will separate him from Trump.
Such as?
Such as his healthcare policies and his just all around being accepting of everyone, and yeah.
Okay, who made the better case?
I'm still undecided.
But if you had to lean right now for your second choice, even slightly, who do you lean towards?
I'd probably go with Bernie right now.
And as we've mentioned, the rules of the Iowa caucuses are unique, most notably how a candidate winning less than 15% of a caucus site's voters is erased from that list, and those voters can then either realign with another candidate, we did the gummy bears, remember, or you can go home. A lot of the eyes, of course, are on the longer shot candidates, too, like Andrew Yang and California's Tom Steyer, to see whether they come in. But the big eyes, of course, for Iowa tonight are on when we're getting results. Should mention the plug, latimes.com, where you can see our reporters in real time there. And as our team in Iowa just reported a little while ago, there was a statement from the Iowa Democratic Party now about 10 minutes ago that said these delays are not a hack or an intrusion, and that the underlying data and paper trail, as Melanie Mason told us, is sound. And so they are working through that process.
So we're still,
slowly.
Incompetence could still be number one then. Not a hack, or the system just failed. It's just not working.
And they'll find a way through it, I suppose. But it's becoming the story of the night. And, I think Californians are watching this like the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And as we've said several times, Californians are maybe taking their cues from this primary to see what they think and what issues we think they are watching for this presidential contest.
That's right. So we asked our readers, what's the most important issue for you heading into the California primary, which is a month away.
March 3rd.
That's right. So we got some good responses. Jack E. Rella said getting rid of Trump and all the corrupt GOP is the biggest issue for him. Not unusual, I think. John Schronick said Medicare for all, a system where everybody has access to equal health care without having to pay a single dime out of pocket because the ultra-rich will finally pay their share in taxes. Interesting.
Well, and that's a big topic here in California,
Huge
can I say, too. It's been pushed a lot. It was talked about in the gubernatorial campaign 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. There is a very strong faction talking about it in Sacramento, where we are. So that's a topic that I guess is near and dear to supporters of Sanders and Warren and those who have talked about that.
That's right. And then one for the ages, Leo here says climate change with an exclamation point.
Speaking of a California topic that we talk about a lot.
A lot.
A ton.
But I'm also curious, because Iowa has changed, the Democrats have changed the caucus procedure, if you will, and the tabulation with this new app and also the metrics. They were going to give us 3 different numbers. They were going to give us how the candidates did in the first alignment or the first vote, the second one, and then the final, which would be the delegates, the number of delegates that they would get, which is the number by which most news organizations will follow once we ever get a number. But we're changing a few things here in California. So, and I know you're working on a piece about this, but this is what's got me concerned for us. We're making changes. Let's look at what's happening in Iowa.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and we've written about it in the Times several instances. I mean, anytime you start to add new rules or new methods for voters or caucus goers, people have confusion a little bit. And that's to say nothing, of course, of the actual mechanical problems that you might have. And they are all done to increase people's activity and engagement in the process. Mm-hmm. Here in California, we're going to allow you to register to vote on Election Day. We are going to allow your ballot to be counted if it comes in 3 days after Election Day, as long as it's postmarked by Tuesday. In Los Angeles County, we are changing to a system of vote centers, which will be fewer than the neighborhood polling places. Again, these are things that people are watching and they're wondering about. And it's not to say that there's a template from Iowa of things that don't go right, but people rely on these elections, and we have these conversations, and they impact campaigns, and they, and how we talk about how our democracy is. And the simple fact, I think to your point, Anna, that the Iowa Democratic Party has to put out a statement that says it's not a hack, it's not an intrusion, goes to show where people's minds go. And that's also one of the challenges, isn't it, in social media, is that it's wonderful that we all talk about it, but it can be difficult when we don't know if we can ascertain the accuracy of that.
That's so true. And the thing is, this may or may not affect voter turnout, but it does call into question the accuracy of any results. If it's taking so long and they're telling us that things are broken, it's really, people really want that extra quality control. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that they're taking extra time.
And this is going to be a breeding ground for the conspiracy theorists. And that's going to be a detraction from what actually took place, because this is just going to, it's going to be like wildfire.
Right, right.
Well, continuing our coverage here, earlier this evening, pollster Frank Luntz asked Iowa voters what issues they care about most as they make their choice tonight.
What is it about her record or where she stands that has attracted you so much?
Oh, again, like many of the Democratic candidates, she's great on all the issues, but again, her practical solutions for issues like healthcare, climate change, I just see her as more moderate, not quite so left. Not that I'm not supportive of very progressive policies, but I want someone that can appeal to a broader electorate. And again, she's taken positions in every major issue that we care about that I think she can do something and deliver on.
There are other progressives in this race. Why is Bernie Sanders the right progressive?
I think he's probably the one that's been doing it for, in my opinion, he's been doing it for a very long time. He is not, obviously hasn't been with the Democratic Party the whole time. We had to align here to make this work for, we're becoming more progressive, as a country. And he's been doing it the whole time. So I think it's awesome to see someone like Bernie Sanders hasn't wavered in any of his beliefs, or he's just pushing the limits of where that left is.
I want to go with Mayor Pete because he has military service, and is going to be a true commander-in-chief, unlike who we have in the White House right now. I want to go with Mayor Pete because he doesn't have friends and or enemies in the Senate and the House of Representatives. I think that, like this gentleman said, he's going to bring fresh ideas, and I think that he's going to be a leader, and I think that he reminds me and has the charisma of Obama.
Well, I think that idealism shouldn't be dead, and that he brings idealism to it, but it's still there's a practicality and a possibility of achieving it.
And my own feeling is that without getting money out of politics, we don't really have a good opportunity to do other things that need to be done, like healthcare, education, environment, those kinds of things.
I think the biggest misunderstanding is when people hear the word like socialism, they get really scared. There's a lot of people from my parents' generation, or people from, people who hear that are Republicans that grew up on farms that hear they say he's a socialist when, that's for some reason is a really scary term for them, and it's not a scary term. He's not a socialist, not coming here to totally get rid of our government and be controlling. We're here to. He wants to make a change. I mean, healthcare should be for all people. That's a crazy, that people would even want to argue that. And we're the largest, most powerful country in the world.
And in addition to our reporters and editors in the newsroom, the Los Angeles Times editorial board has been taking its own pulse of this race. And earlier today, the board published a list of the races it will endorse for the California primary, which, as we have said, is March 3rd. 4 weeks from tomorrow. I feel like we should have a big drum roll here as John Healy, a member of the editorial board, joins us now to explain the endorsement process. So, tell us.
So, we have the candidates come in and stand in the four corners of the room and...
No.
Are you looking for viability?
an app to tabulate it then, right?
Yeah, and so the endorsement eventually gets published, perhaps, if the app finally works. No, we have no problems with our app. I just want to make that entirely clear. What we do is, in any endorsement process, is we do a lot of reporting. With the presidential candidates, not all of them will come in. So that's one of the things that makes it different from when we're endorsing in governor or state legislators or city council, when we can meet with all the candidates. Here, we're kind of at their mercy. But that's just part of the reporting process. So we go out, we find out where they are in the various positions. We also get a feeling for that great big electability question, right? And try and park our own preconceptions about what that means and take a more holistic view of it. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make the best case for a candidate. And then we also have to hear in the presidential race, we have to hear from the paper's owner, because we're speaking for him.
You know what I really like, John, is we've been playing some of the clips of the editorial process of this meeting. And for me, that gives me an opportunity to kind of pull that curtain back and see what really goes on in that meeting, because I've always been fascinated by that. I don't know if you've had much reaction to that or how that felt, putting cameras into this space that, probably was very holy for a long time and sacred.
Frankly, it was a little weird. Over the years, we've evolved from doing these things entirely off the record because we felt we wanted these candidates to be able to speak freely and also to be more frank about their own prospects and what they felt about the other candidates, to one where we felt there's going to be an interest in this, and we ought to share it with the public. And so this year we actually did video too. And to the candidates' credits, they weren't playing to the cameras. They're answering the questions. So it seemed pretty natural, actually.
So the presidential race is an endorsement process we expect, and then and that's the one that everyone is going to look at and is going to be so super focused on. Also, we want to shed a little light on this process. Since I sit in the newsroom part, actually I sit in the Sacramento newsroom part, and I don't get to see your part. Remind people how many people are on the editorial board. Do you all vote? Is it whoever gets the most votes wins?
What's the
how does it?
Okay, sure. So there are 9 of us, and 1 is in Washington, and 1 is in Orange County. The rest of us meet on a regular basis, but the endorsement meetings, we bring the candidates in, and then we have a couple of members who are assigned to that particular race, and they do all the extra reporting. And then they come back to the board and they say, okay, here's what we think we ought to do. And then we discuss it. And then, yeah, we'll vote on it, but we try not to do things by a slim majority. We try to have a real consensus about these things. And we tend to, although we have some ideological differences on the board, we're not as far split as the American people are. We're a little bit closer together. So then we have to take our recommendations to up the chain, especially in a race like president, and say, okay, this is where we want to go, and here's why.
I'm curious, and I'm really going to toss this out there. You say you're not as split as the American people are. How do you think, then, that serves the American people if the editorial board is not as split as America is?
That's a fair question. We write for the Los Angeles Times. We don't write for every little newspaper across the country, so different regions have their own voices. And Los Angeles is a very blue area in a very blue state. So our board tends to reflect some of that. But we're not all far to the left.
As a member of that board, what do you want to see coming out of an election night like tonight and moving forward to New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada? It's certainly some of the issues, but it's also how they respond to the campaign, respond to the critiques or the supporters.
Well, you don't want to come out with an endorsement for a candidate who's no longer viable.
Yes.
Right? So we're going back and forth about whether we should wait for New Hampshire and Iowa and possibly Nevada later in the month. And most of us didn't want to wait because you kind of want to be out there when there's still minds being made up.
And ballots are being cast right now. I don't mean to interrupt, but Californians are getting their ballots, so it's not though we're waiting until March 3rd. I got mine today. Yeah.
So the timing, when we do our endorsements, we try to have them all done by the time ballots go out, and we never succeed. It's a really reporting-intensive process. It takes a lot of time. But that's the goal. We would like to tell people what our thoughts are and what our reasoning is, especially, before they have to make a decision themselves. But actually, our first endorsement probably will hit the newspaper on Wednesday, so we're already a couple days behind.
That's one of your local endorsements, or that's our...
School board.
Okay, which people care about, so.
Yeah.
Do you think that in this time now where journalists' credentials and credibility are being challenged and questioned, how do you feel that an editorial board endorsement fits in? And is it harder in a way?
That's another fair question. There are people out there, readers, who feel that we ought not to be expressing any kind of opinion anywhere, and particularly when we are speaking supposedly for the newspaper. Some people think that sort of casts a shadow over the whole process. I don't think so, because it's clearly delineated as opinion. And what we also try to bring to the table is not just vote for this person, but here's what we see in this person, and here's what we see in the opponents. And this is why we think you ought to vote for this person. But here's our reporting. So you can make up your own mind. Maybe you'll come to a different conclusion based on the facts that we bring you.
One quick question I have is that we've talked a lot on this program, and people are talking everywhere, about this idea that do you want someone as a Democrat, if on the Democratic side here, certainly there are Republican voters, who can have the best chance to defeat the president, or who most aligns, who has the right stance on the issues? You as an editorial writer and as a voter, John, what do you think that, and what do you and your colleagues think about that question, do you think?
That is the $64 million question. We said in sometime in 2015 that Donald Trump was not fit to be president. We said
got a lot of attention for that.
We said it very clearly
Yes.
in March of 2016. Then we came out with a series in April of 2017, Our Dishonest President, where we said this guy should not be president. So for us, the number one thing is making sure that there are not 4 more years of Donald Trump. I mean, that's the stance of our editorial board. That is our opinion, and we are in the opinion business.
So wait a minute, you're basing your decision on who can beat Trump? That's part of the decision-making?
It is definitely part of the decision-making. It has to be. And so some of us have candidates that we really like, but we know they're not going to be around in a couple of months because they're just too far down in the polls. And so that's an easy one. That's, okay, that person is not electable. That person's not even going to make it to the convention, practically. But there are probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 Democrats who are in that group, who are going to have a chance at this nomination. Right? And then among them, you go, all right, how do we judge electability?
Right.
Because one of the problems with that is, for years, electability meant somebody who looked like presidents in the past, right? And then we had Barack Obama. And then Hillary Clinton got nominated and appeared to be on her way to breaking that glass ceiling. So can we unleash the idea of electability from that picture that we all have in our minds about what a president has looked like over the years?
Yeah. You've got your work cut out for you.
Yes, you do.
I like my side on the news side. I'll let you do that hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
My pleasure.
A little bit more behind the scenes here. Former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg also stopped by the Times to meet with the editorial board, and here's part of that conversation.
We're going to actually go through.
Mayor, John Healy.
Thanks for having us over.
In South Bend, you've had a rocky relationship with the black community for almost all the years that you've been mayor, starting around the time that you fired your black police chief, and I know you had reasons to believe that he had acted wrongly by allegedly taping secretly other police officers. But as you yourself have said, it affected your relationship with black citizens of your city for all this time. You've had dust-ups with Black Lives Matter. What is it that you're doing wrong that you can fix?
Well, I would describe it as a family relationship. That's complicated. First of all, it's important for me to say that I would not have been reelected the way I was if it weren't for support in the black community. And most black elected officials who are supporting anybody in this race who are in South Bend are supporting me. This is not because they think I'm perfect or because we've been able to resolve all of these issues at home. It's because when these issues have faced us, we've worked together side by side to do something about it. Whether it was around policing, where we became the most transparent police department in the region, pushing information down to the incident level on use of force online, or empowering residents to be part of the process to for example, revise policies on how force is used or body cameras or training. Not all of that's reached the goal, where not even close to where it needs to be. In particular, I'm thinking about recruiting, where we've actually seen the diversity of the department slide in the wrong direction because of a lot of the issues that we faced. And not just around policing, but we have tremendous income, racial wealth and income inequality. And part of how we know that is I commissioned the research to tell us some of the brutal facts. Now, this is not unique to South Bend, and it's not something that began on my watch. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? And working together, we've reduced black unemployment, we've reduced poverty for African Americans, and often been able to do it at a faster rate than the country as a whole. So it's not just riding the waves of an economic recovery. But here, too, there are areas where we clearly have a long way to go. And so my focus has been on making sure that we engage to make sure things are better, that we acknowledge where things aren't where they need to be. But we also get results and do it together. And of course, I have critics as well as supporters, but I believe that's the reason I have more supporters than critics.
Just to follow up on that, how your polling with the the African American community is pretty low. So how are you going to overcome that? What's your strategy? What policies do you need to address? I mean, what's going on?
Well, first of all, I would say there's a lot of regional differences here. Yeah. So in the Midwest, where people know me best, I'm doing well with non-white as well as white voters. The South is certainly more of a challenge. And I get it. I don't think it's just about policy. It's about voters who have felt taken for granted by my party. And you come along as a new guy with a lot of ideas and big policies on offer. And before people care about what's in your plan, they want to have a sense of what moves you. The Douglas Plan has been praised as the most comprehensive plan on dismantling systemic racism put forward by any presidential candidate, because we look at how everything fits together. It's economic empowerment with things like the effort to co-invest in black entrepreneurs. It's education, and not just support for HBCUs, but making sure we support things like completion. It's health, it's housing, it's access to democracy itself, it's criminal justice reform, but recognizing that's not all there is to the black experience in America. I will stand by the Douglas Plan as the best piece of comprehensive policy work done on this in this election. But people also want to feel like they know you. And that's the work that we're really continuing to work to do.
Donald Trump's told the Midwest that he would bring back manufacturing and that would lift the economy. Mm-hmm. What do you tell people in the Midwest?
Well, for one thing, we're in a manufacturing recession. So the only economic promise I've seen this president keep was the giant tax cut. That's it. And whether you're a worker seeing a manufacturing recession or a farmer seeing the way that he's jerked around, in particular, corn, it's not just soybean farmers suffering from things like the China trade war. It's also the total inconsistency around ethanol and these so-called small refinery waivers going to giant operations. So he just has not delivered for my part of the country. I'm glad unemployment is low. That's great.
But what do you tell people when they say, how do we lift up our economy in the Midwest? What is your simplistic answer?
My simplistic answer? Make sure you get paid more. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of complicated things going on, globalization, automation, technology, yeah. But also the biggest problem in our economy is blindingly obvious and abundantly simple, and it's that people aren't getting paid enough. And that's especially true in real terms if you think about how wage increases are generally swallowed by increases in the cost of higher education, health, saving for retirement. And most people get this. The simple fact that one job is not enough, that there's not one county in the country where someone living on minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Look, the house that I started out in as a child, talk about affordable housing, just changed hands for about $60,000. You get a good, decent house in that neighborhood for about half that. And we still have folks experiencing homelessness, and we still have folks experiencing a profound housing insecurity. We got to make sure people get paid more.
Even before you get to try out your foreign and domestic policies, you're going to have to get through the primaries. Mm-hmm. And I know that in every primary, but this one in particular, Democrats are racked with fears and indecision. The big question they're asking themselves is, who's the best candidate? So your campaign asks a lot of people. Here are all these old vets, former vice president, senators, but you should take a chance on me, a relatively unknown, young, small-town mayor. Why should they take a gamble on you?
Well, first of all, we begin with this. Is it important to you to beat Donald Trump? In the last 50 years, every single time my party has won the White House, certain things have been true about the nominee. It's been somebody who was new on the national scene, had not run for president before, was calling the country to its highest values, did not work in Washington, or if they did, had not for very long, and was ushering in a new generation of leadership. Now, we've gone different ways many years, but those were the years we've come up short. Every time
one thing, they were also male. That's another issue.
Regrettably, that one I'm fine with seeing some change. And so I recognize this is not how everybody thinks about electability, but I would say, you might want to look at that pattern and think about it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming in.
Same here. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
The vibe from our reporters with the Times on the ground is that Pete Buttigieg and his supporters were pretty confident headed in tonight. Hopefully we'll find out exactly what night they had in store, as a lot of folks. We should point out, by the way, that we haven't said this tonight, but Donald Trump did win the Republican caucuses in Iowa, as our results at LATimes.com show, with 97% of the delegates or the votes from those caucuses. So we've got one result.
And that's an easier one because the Republicans do it, whoever gets 51% of the votes wins. Not like the Democrats, who have a very complicated math equation to figure this out.
Right.
Right.
You've been tracking what our folks, our Times team, has been seeing on the ground?
That's right. So we may not have all of Iowa's results, but we do have one result. And we've got a reporter at a precinct that's a satellite precinct, actually, in Palm Springs, which went for Klobuchar. So that's kind of a fun. We have the tweet.
We should have like a banner. Amy Klobuchar wins Palm Springs.
So 108 caucus goers, 49 went for Amy Klobuchar. So at least we know that.
You know, I think as part of changing how they do things, the satellite caucuses, that's part of the change. But also, now I could be wrong on this, apparently the tallies from the caucus satellite locations will be added to the first, meaning when all the Iowa regular caucus numbers come in, and who knows when that will be, that the satellite locations will then be added to that, as opposed to it being done all at the same time. Maybe that's the hiccup. Huh?
Maybe.
And it's really interesting. Melissa Gomez, who was our reporter there, that you just put up her tweet, said that she brought in support. I think I was reading the tweet from the Steyer and Warren camps of people who were there at first. And that's one of the Klobuchar conversations, is that she can bring people together. I mean, and so that kind of played out, at least in the Palm Springs satellite caucus, it seems like.
That's right. And that's, one of the big distinctions between caucusing and regular primary voting, right, is that you can bring in the supporters of other candidates.
You woo, you lobby, you do it forward. And you had other folks that you've been watching of ours.
That's right. So we are continuing to report on what went wrong here in Iowa with the app. Our reporter, Matt Pierce, this is a tweet from Chris Keller, but a reporter, Matt Pierce, who was in Iowa, talked to a lieutenant governor who is a precinct chair, and she said that she was struggling to work the app for several days. She heard this morning that there were other precinct chairs that had the same issue, which is when they got this hotline number. So it seems like this maybe isn't super late breaking news for people in Iowa. They probably saw this coming a little bit, which is kind of scary.
And Seema Mehta, the reporter he's talking about there, is one of our most experienced Iowa reporters. I was joking before the broadcast, I think Seema would move to Iowa if she could. Talking to the lieutenant governor there, I'll be really curious to see, as we piece together what the heck happened before we got to today.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. We also have Mark Barabak, who is he works out of the Sacramento office with you.
No, he's based in Northern California,
Okay.
But he's a wanderer everywhere.
That's right. He's a nomad. Well, he's talking about kind of, I think, what's on everybody's minds, which is this the end of Iowa going first if they can't really hold it together with their technology and their process? I don't know.
It's a reasonable question. Well, it's been 4 hours already, and we have no idea what happened tonight.
Well, and so many states have pushed to be part of that beginning conversation, not just Iowa and New Hampshire, with Nevada, South Carolina, California moves up. So it's a really interesting question, right? I mean, are we going to see a groundswell of a change in presidential campaigns?
Only time will tell.
Yeah.
Perhaps someone who can help us with this problem is Times reporter Tyrone Beeson, who has been back and forth to Iowa several times over the past few months. And tonight he was at a caucus in Iowa City. Tyrone joins us now on the phone in Iowa City. Can you help us figure out what in the world has happened with the voting tonight?
Well, as I'm listening to you guys, I'm thinking that maybe I don't know the answer to the problems in all precincts, but I'll tell you that on the campus of the University of Iowa, in a huge ballroom at the Student Union, there were 760-some people, most of them students, who were filing in up until 8:15 or 8, it looked like tonight or something like that. And so everything got started a little bit late. With so many people who had to be organized according to candidate, it looked like chaos, but I kind of got the sense that it was working, more or less. It just took a long time to count the votes. By 10, I started to worry myself that something wasn't working right. And so I wandered over to the table where they're counting the votes still after they've done the realignment process. And the thing is, a lot of these people, especially the students, group of students, for Pete Buttigieg and some of the others who I guess thought their votes were already counted left. And so they were counting votes and trying to apportion the delegates based on numbers that didn't quite add up. So there were over, I think, 760 or so total people in the room, but only 754 were counted in that second round. And so they were trying to make the math work. In the end, Bernie Sanders got 4 delegates, Elizabeth Warren got 3, and Pete Buttigieg, who was really the point of contention here, got 2. So they were trying to figure out who that third person was going to be. But at one point, the gentleman who was one of the organizers who was counting the votes just sort of said, 80 people just up and left without making a second choice.
Huh. But you can do that, right? You can. If you can't figure
you have the
out
right.
how to realign, you can leave. You don't have to
absolutely.
Vote.
Absolutely. At that period, for a while, people they actually extended for 15 minutes the period where people could realign, basically, and convince each other to come to one camp or another. But people were filtering out by then. It had already been a very long process. The lights went out within minutes of the proceedings starting. So you have imagine a ballroom with pitch black, and then suddenly cell phone screens come up, and it's like a concert or something. I tweeted, it's like being at the Hollywood Bowl or something, because suddenly they're having caucus night in the dark, and the guy just continues his speech because he doesn't want to slow the process anymore. So there was a little bit of a snafu even before the vote counting started. So it was a little bit disorganized, but there's something very charming about it, and analog about it that, but yeah, in the end, it's caused all these complications that we're seeing.
Sorry, Tyrone, they're talking to us, and we know you just stopped talking. So, I'm sorry.
No, I was
Please,
just going to ask you one quick question, Tyrone. It's just that, all of us are watching this process from afar, and, there's a frustration out there. What is what do you get the sense there of the caucus goers? Are they as frustrated as we are? Are they taking it in stride better than the world's angst over Iowa tonight?
I think they're taking it in stride. There are some people who are a little bit antsy, when they extended the realignment period for another 15 minutes because it had already dragged on. But I think because there were so many people in the room, it was pretty understandable. And, it was orderly, it was cheerful. People were, doing competing chants for their candidates. So even though there was a delay, right, and it's kind of a messy process, people seem to be taking it in stride. And, of course, when the top 3 vote getters were announced, people were super excited about that.
Tyrone, do you think that there are going to be some legal challenges here? Because based on what you just described at one location, if I'm Pete Buttigieg, for example, I'm going to demand a recount, and I may make a legal challenge because some precious delegates may have been lost there because of some, math computing problems.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. We'll see. I think Pete is going to be speaking pretty soon, if not right now. But, there were people on Pete's team, or on his side, I should say, who were asking and re-asking, hey, that can't be right. Can you do this again? So they were pretty diligent, at the site. And I think that by the end, they were pleased that he was the number 3 vote getter. But they couldn't have been totally satisfied because it took so long, and it seemed like something was wrong for quite a while there, and it was unclear what that was.
I'm just curious, one more thing about just the mood of the voters that you have seen there, whether it's now or through the whole process of your reporting. I mean, there is this larger feeling that the nation is very polarized, both, one camp and the other camp in terms of the major parties, but even inside the Democratic Party, some polarization about Sanders supporters or Mayor Pete supporters or Biden supporters. Do you get that sense? Because you have talked a little bit about people being good-natured and kind of working through it. We heard it from other reporters. Inside the Democratic caucus ranks, do they feel that polarized, or do they have a middle ground somewhere that they can find?
I think you're right. I mean, there's a little bit of both. I think because there are clearly 2 wings, there's a more progressive wing and there's more of a centrist wing, there is a bit of a tension there. Pete Buttigieg talked about that quite directly during the campaign stops that I attended, and he spoke about this need to have someone in the middle, that Democrats don't have to choose between a revolution on the Bernie side or what's familiar with the former vice president, that there's somewhere in the middle, and that's he called it a powerful American majority that's already ready to make big changes, and you don't need to sort of veer off of one side or the other in order to get there. I detected a little bit less than that among the voters, but one thing that they are absolutely concerned about is the polarization in the country. And people want to defeat Donald Trump, not just because they disagree with his policies, but because they feel like he's tearing the country apart. That's what I heard. It wasn't so much about the Democrats. It was about needing a Democratic candidate who can pull the entire country together.
Tyrone, I saw your incredible video that you did on race relations in Dubuque. It's a wonderful piece, especially when you sit down with everyone to have a meal. It's very insightful. I just wanted to let you know how much I loved it, and we're going to let everyone know to check that out on the LA Times website and also on the LA Times YouTube site. Thank you so much. Yeah. It looks to me, Tyrone, like you're going to go to bed like a lot of other people, not knowing who won the Iowa caucuses.
More reporting tomorrow.
That's how they do it here in Iowa.
Apparently so.
Thank you, Tyrone Beeson. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
What an evening this has been, you guys. Honestly, I never thought that we'd be sitting here at this time of night and having no clue as to who won Iowa.
We had all kinds of plans about if it was so-and-so, if it was so-and-so.
We were going to go to victory parties.
Right.
Basically, tonight, everyone gets to give their own victory speech. Everybody wins.
Right, I guess.
No, that's not true. That's kind of the crazy thing is that everyone caucused. There is a winner. We just don't know who it is yet.
Is the enthusiasm damping down or not at all when you see online, when you look at social media reaction? Is it just still as hot as it is at 9:15 at night? I mean,
it's getting worse.
Yeah, no, I think it's worse. I think, I mean, there's the majority of the country is still, it's still waking hours. So yeah, the people are finding out now, like, kind of checking the time and going, oh, weren't we supposed to find out at this time if someone won? Still don't know. So it's still going.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry that I'm just so sorry that we were not able to give you the results that we thought we would have. Yeah. But please, you can go to the LA Times website at any time for the latest results. Also, we have some more special programming tomorrow, John.
It's the week of politics. I mean, it's kind of the year of politics in some ways. In addition, after we go through Iowa, of course, tomorrow we have the President's State of the Union speech. President Donald Trump delivers that from the House of Representatives floor, followed by the Democratic response. We are going to have live coverage of that as well as we will be checking in with real-time reaction of Californians, a focus group of Californians who will sit here and talk about what that speech looks like. And again, I think it's a really important transition out of Iowa because we will be voting. We are already voting 4 weeks out from Election Day. We will see what these voters think of the president, of the topics of impeachment, foreign policy, the economy, and then also kind of what they make of it. So
the question is that by the time you go on the air tomorrow,
we might know Iowa.
Will we know the results of Iowa?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Samantha, John. What an evening. This is historic.
Been very interesting, yes.
True. But not for the reasons we thought it would be. Thank you so much. And remember, our coverage continues on the LATimes.com. Good night, everyone.